Welcome to Unbelievable Stories. Today's story is full of shocking twists and real drama. Subscribe and like to stay updated. Let's dive in.
My name is Jake Anderson and I'm an alcoholic. I'm in remission, not recovery, since you can't completely heal from addiction. It took me a long time to realize this was a sickness, and believe me, it is. Alcoholism cost me everything, my career, my wife, and my children, until I eventually admitted the reality and got assistance. The price I paid was way too high, and if I could, I'd do everything to go back in time and start over from scratch. Emma and I had been married for 14 years when things began to unravel. We had two wonderful children, Sophia, who was 10 at the time, and Lucas, who was also 10. To be honest, I subsequently discovered that our troubles were deeper than I had previously imagined. Emma, my wife, is a gorgeous lady. Emma had a natural elegance that made whatever she wore look effortlessly chic. She was 55 tall and had striking dark brown hair that she wore in a ponytail when we first met, but she cut it short after we got married for convenience. Despite having two children, she kept her stunning figure. I had a few other girlfriends, and I think she was more envious than I ever was. When I first asked her out, she said no, but I didn't give up, and I asked her again every couple of weeks until she finally said yes. We started dating, though it wasn't exclusive at first. She went out with other guys, and I didn't pry or demand explanations, which may have been what piqued her interest. After leaving sixth form, Emma went to a stage school in Brighton with the ambition and talent to be an actress, and that was her goal. Her course was scheduled to last 2 years, so we parted as friends, and it would be 3 years before our paths crossed again. I, on the other hand, stayed in our hometown of Springfield and began working as a trainee salesman in the service sector. It was mostly boring, but I learned the basics of selling, and after a few years, when I was 10 years old, my parents died in a car accident on the highway, and my uncle and aunt took me in and cared for me. They were a childless couple, and I grew to love them both as much as they loved me. Unfortunately, my aunt died of cancer when I was 17, and Uncle John began drinking more and more heavily. Fortunately, he had some good friends who helped steer him off the self-destructive path he was on, and he stopped. CF was chosen as the launch dealership for a new goods vehicle manufactured by Freightliner, and my boss offered me the opportunity to develop the entire sales program: who to target, how to prepare the launch promotion, and how to organize the whole thing. I was good at my job, and I quickly began to move up the ladder. Selling vehicles is difficult work. A salesman must know his customers and understand their businesses. The main launch plan I devised was a sort of vehicle showcase, but instead of fast cars, we would have 2 of the new wagons on static display and 2 more available for our customers to take out on the track, ungoverned. I proposed that we let our customers try them out and give them the chance to thrash flat out around the circuit, and my boss agreed, but he wanted some models to decorate the static vehicles and tempt the customers to stay and enjoy the day. I struggled to find a company that could provide suitable models. Then I remembered Emma. We had kept in touch and even dated on occasion when she was home visiting her parents. We got along well, but the trouble was that her career was based in Brighton and she was reluctant to give up her lifestyle. She had attended stage school, and her ambition was to be an actress. She had yet to make the breakthrough, but she was still confident that she would. She freely admitted I contacted her and explained my problem, and she told me to give her a couple of days and she would get back to me. She did better than that, and was on the phone the next morning with costs and told me she was emailing me some photographs of models for selection. That afternoon, I had a review meeting with my boss, and I was able to present him with the complete package and budget projections. He reviewed the presentation and gave me the go-ahead right away. Emma and I spent a lot of time together planning the event, and before long, we became an item. As our feelings deepened and passions mounted, I discovered that she was an adventurous lover and quite the exhibitionist. I guess it was the actress in her. She loved the thrill of doing it in risky places, on the beach during a weekend getaway, in the car at Horizon View. Once, we even got Korg. We married 2 years later in Springfield, but she continued to work and had some success in TV commercials. Things were starting to look up for her when she got cast in a daytime soap as the opinionated catalyst that provided the other actors with a foil to work against. Then she got pregnant with Sophia, which she couldn't understand because she was on the pill, but the doctor told her that the only sure method of birth control was total. Emma was worried that the soap producers would cancel her contract, but to her surprise, they wrote her pregnancy into the storyline. Her parts suddenly began to grow, as did her belly, and they even wanted to record the baby's birth, but I stopped that in its infancy. I think Emma was disappointed, but she didn't push it. After Sophia was born, Emma pulled back on her career and committed herself to being a full-time wife and mother. Emma was a good mother, and her love for our babies shone through. She was the one who got up in the middle of the night when they were little, well, most of the time, and spent hours with them, teaching them to pronounce words and reading them stories from the dozens of children's books we had. When Lucas started school, Emma approached me and told me that she wanted to return to work. We discussed the ramifications, and my concerns were that our family life. We agreed to give it a shot, and Emma contacted her agent, who was thrilled that she was resurrecting her career, and she soon had auditions lined up. She picked up some work doing voiceovers for commercials. True to her word, Emma was always there for us, and we were a happy, close-knit family. Our sex life was about as good as it gets. We made love 4 or 5 times a week and rarely had any arguments. The first signs of change came around 5 years ago, when Emma accepted a role in a new play. The problem was that the theatre was in Leicester, which meant long days. During rehearsals, the commute times added up, and she was out of the house before 6:30 a.m., returning well after 7:30 p.m. We could live with that during rehearsals, but once the play opened to great success, she was absent from our lives until going on midnight most nights. Initially, she would only do this once or twice a week, but gradually, over the next few months, it got so that she was away 3 or 4 nights a week. Her contract allowed her 1 day off every week, and that became our lifeline, but the strain was telling on our marriage. Our sex life was now virtually on hold, and even though we all traveled up to Leicester every other weekend to spend time with her, Emma was becoming more difficult to communicate with. Meanwhile, I had 2 years. Her mother was a lifesaver. She came over every day with an evening meal prepared and was there when the kids returned from school. I fell into the habit of having a couple of drinks every night. The kids were not the only ones who missed Emma. During the award season, I became suspicious that she was unfaithful. Emma was nominated for an award as a supporting actress, and she called to ask me to accompany her to the dinner and ceremony. I thought this was a great opportunity to try and mend bridges, so I arranged for Emma's mother to babysit and joined Emma at her shared flat. The awards ceremony is traditionally held in early February every year, and this year was no exception. I washed, changed into my penguin suit, and waited until Emma was ready to join me. She looked just great. I praised her on her gown, and she embraced me, but when I attempted to kiss her, she repelled me with, "I've spent ages on my makeup, please don't spoil it for me." At the dinner, I was introduced to Michael Green, the play's director, and some of the cast, as well as Thomas Walker, the producer, and a couple of others. George was a big man, around 6 feet tall and about 53 years old, but he was running to fat now and looked even older. The dinner and the awards went on, but finally, it was over, and Emma duly won her award and thanked everyone for their help and support throughout her career. She returned to our table and accepted the kisses and hugs from everyone seated there or nearby. There were no restrictions on kissing now. She was pretty enthusiastic about it, all thoughts of disturbing her makeup long forgotten. I felt as if I was being deliberately ignored, so I helped myself to the abundant bottles of wine on the table. Eventually, it was time to leave, and I was impatient to get back to the flat. I was keen to strip that gown off her. I wanted her so much. So I hid my disappointment and reluctantly tagged along. The alcohol was flowing at the party, and I was introduced to so many people that I lost track of time. I was drinking steadily and needed to relieve myself, so I found the toilet, but there was a line, and as I stood there behind 2 striking young ladies, I overheard them talking about Emma. One of them said, "Of course, I heard that she only got the part because she was prepared to spread her legs for Thomas Walker and his backers." The other lady laughed and added, "Good luck to her." My buddy went out with him and informed me that he liked rough sex. She stated she couldn't walk or sit for days following, so she'll take any portion she can get. Here's another piece of theatrical gossip. I heard he keeps her at his beck and call, and she can never get a day off to visit her children. He insists on her being there to serve him whenever the whim strikes him. I feel horrible for a spouse. He is at home looking after the kids while she cheats on him. My Emma would never cheat on me, but as I struggled to digest what I had heard, a little voice in the back of my head kept whispering in my ear that what I had overheard could explain some of our problems. I tried to dismiss it, but it remained a persistent irritation every time I looked at her. I escaped from the queue and went outside for some fresh air, peeing in the bushes as I tried to decide what to do with the information I had overheard. I was more composed when I returned to the party and went to find Emma. I soon found her at the center of a group of men, including Thomas Walker and 3 other co-producers. She informed me that these were some of the backers of the play. I tried to keep myself under control. If just some of the backers turned out to the conversation was a little stilted, and George, in particular, seemed ill at ease in my presence, and I wondered if he had a guilty conscience. I was tempted to confront Emma right then, but I had no proof, and after all, the gossips could be wrong, so I decided to keep my silence. When Emma asked me to get her another drink, I thought I saw a look of relief on the producers' faces as I walked away. I got another drink for Emma, and after I handed it to her, I subtly signaled that I wanted to leave soon, but she shook her head and turned her back on me to continue her discussion with her admirers. I felt left out and abandoned once more, so I sought solace at the bar. In short, I drank myself legless before nodding off in an armchair. It must have been an hour or so later that I was jerked out of my sleep by a kick to my shins. Emma was ready to leave and she was see the next morning. Things were icy, no, they were Arctic. I tried to apologize for my excesses the night before, but she called me a drunk and accused me of ruining her big night, among other things, none of them complimentary. I wanted to talk about our marriage, but clearly, that wasn't going to happen that day. She stormed out of the flat, saying she'd talk to me when she returned, but she never said where she was going. Later, I received a call from her mother informing me that Lucas was ill. She suspected appendicitis and had asked the doctor to call. I informed her that I would catch the next train home and packed my overnight gear before I left. I attempted to call Emma on her mobile, but it went straight to voicemail, so I wrote her a brief note explaining my reason for my early departure. I didn't go into detail about Lucas' condition, let her do something for herself if she so desired. When I returned 2 hours later, Lucas was in the county medical center undergoing an appendectomy. Emma's parents and Sophia were there, and we greeted each other with hugs. Her mother told me that the surgeon had said that the prognosis was good, Lucas was young and fit, and there was no reason for undue concern. Emma's parents asked where she was, and I simply said, I have no idea. I tried calling her several times from the train and had after what seemed like an eternity, the surgeon came out and told us that the operation went perfectly and that we would be able to see Lucas in an hour or so, once he had recovered from the anesthetic. A couple of hours later, we were all sitting around his bed chatting when Emma stormed into the room, looking like she was ready to slay anyone who impeded her. She wasted no time berating me for not telling her that her son was ill and would not listen to any responses. Her father I attempted to follow them, but her mother stood in front of me and said, leave it to her father, son. You are like a son to both of us, and maybe a few home truths from her father would be more successful this time. I saw the wisdom in that and went back to reassure Lucas and Sophia that their mother was only stressed out by her job. Emma came in 10 minutes later and apologized to everyone for her behavior. Her concern for Lucas had gotten the best of her, and she hugged Lucas and proceeded to regale everyone about her triumph at the award ceremony. Visiting time was over in a blink, and we departed. When we arrived at the foyer, Thomas Walker was clearly waiting for Emma. Emma joined us in the car and acted as if there was nothing strange about what we had just witnessed. I brushed past him and waited in the car with Sophia while Emma stood talking animatedly with George. I saw her turn to leave him, but he pulled her around, and they kissed goodbye, not that unusual, but she kissed him on the lips. Sophia was visibly angry and questioned her mother about the kiss. What's with you and him? That was more than a thank you kiss, she added, pointing at George. Are you and Dad divorcing or separating? She inquired. I had heard the stories and Sophia couldn't have known about them, so her query was incredibly insightful. Emma responded, of course not. I was grateful to George for driving me all the way from Leicester today. When do you plan to return to your job? I questioned, since I believe Lucas needs your presence at this moment. He'll stop by tonight and return tomorrow afternoon in time for the evening show. He is no longer in danger, and I am certain that you and Mom will be able to manage until he is discharged from the hospital. He'll plan to take some time off during his recovery, she said. I was furious with her response and allowed my anger get the best of me. You are something else, you know. I exploded. Our kid is still in the hospital, and all you can worry about is going back to your dumb job. Maybe, just maybe, you should reconsider your choice, because if you don't, there will be ramifications that neither you nor I can control or predict. When we got home, Emma went upstairs to our bedroom and did not return that night. I took her some sandwiches and coffee, knocked on the door, and she opened it, took the tray from me without comment, and closed the door in my face. I slept in Lucas' bed that night and for the next few nights. In the morning, over breakfast, Emma informed Sophia and me that she had reconsidered and decided to take a sabbatical from the play until Lucas was fully recovered. She also made it very clear that she was doing this under duress and that I was the one being held responsible. Over the next few weeks, Emma tried very hard to make things right between her and the children, and I never returned to our bedroom or tried to get intimate with her. Within 3 weeks, Lucas was back to normal, and Emma told us that she would be returning to her position on stage in Leicester the following week. She did make a few compromises, promising to be home every other night for the first 2 weeks. The first time she didn't show up, I called, worried that something had happened because she was usually back by midnight. Her phone was answered by Thomas Walker, who explained that Emma was in the shower and would call me back, which she duly did. I immediately asked why she was still in Leicester, and she came up with some lame excuse about being too tired to come home that night. I questioned her bluntly, "Why is he there?" She must have sensed the rage in my voice as she attempted to appease me by vowing to return home tomorrow. I had had enough and added, "I noticed you failed to answer my question, so I'll ask it again. Why is George in your room at this time of night? Is it obvious enough, or do I need to explain everything out for you?" She said, "He was just leaving." "He'll talk to you tomorrow," she said before hanging up. I began with the whiskey, and when that was completed, the vodka washed it down well. She didn't come home the next night, so I phoned her again and had to leave a message asking her not to bother coming home unless it was for good. In hindsight, it was clear that I was simply avoiding confronting the problems in my marriage. It was easier to drown my problems than to face them, and this habit grew. I was drinking a bottle of spirits every night after the kids had gone to bed, no matter what it was, whiskey, rum, you name it. Emma got home one night after the play and found me passed out in the chair, the empty bottle still clutched to my breast. She went angry and accused me of being completely irresponsible. What if anything had occurred, like a fire or something? She cried. I was still half drunk as I said something to the effect of if she had been at home more frequently, the problem would not have happened. After that, she was furious and went to bed. The next day was a Saturday, so there would be no work. Emma spent some time with the kids before leaving for Leicester again, and she didn't say anything to me before she went. I tried to make amends by calling her repeatedly on her phone, but I never got a response. She didn't come home the next week, even on her day off. She did call the kids on their phones every day, but she made no effort to contact me. I started drinking more, and one bottle wasn't enough to dull my loneliness. Her mother was the one who noticed her absence and forced me to sit down and face the issue. Emma came home the next night, and we finally had a long heart-to-heart. I don't know what her mother said to her, but she was in a far more conciliatory mood. She accepted that her current job was the root cause of our problems, and she told me that she had decided to quit. She would have to give them 2 weeks' notice, and she would email them that night. When I confronted her about her relationship with Thomas Walker, she assured me that she had never had an affair with him or anyone else. She was very convincing. After all, she was an actress, and in any case, I wanted desperately to believe her, so I decided to let sleeping dogs lie. She also got her digs in about my excessive drinking, and I promised to cut back, which I did, even though I refused to admit to myself that I was overdoing it. The make-up sex was fantastic, and the only thing I noticed was that she started to talk dirty to me while we were intimate. It was strange. While we always talked during our lovemaking before, the difference was that now she was describing her fantasies to me and encouraging me to do the same. I asked her where this new twist came from, and she told me that her flatmate and she had nothing much to do during the day, so they got into discussing their deepest, hidden fantasies. The next few years were more settled, and Emma picked up enough work locally to keep her busy. Pressure at my work was steadily increasing. The trade was going through a hard spell, the recession was looming, and one of the first effects was that companies held onto their fleets longer. This, coupled with the high fuel costs, meant that our customers were holding back on reinvesting, so trying to sell in that market was stressful. In an effort to close a deal with one of my customers, I took him out to a nice restaurant and entertained him, perhaps too well. We were both as drunk as skunks and were at the stage where dirty jokes were being told, and I had just suggested that we move on to a local club. Unfortunately, neither of us knew that his wife had employed her. She acquired everything she needed that night, including photos, and emailed copies to my boss and Emma. The next morning, the client contacted my boss and informed him that we had lost his business and why. My boss summoned me to his office and fired me on the spot. When Emma got the images of me at the club with a lady excessively close, she went berserk, and the pathetic explanation that it was just business didn't cut it for her. Needless to say, things were quite cold around the home for the following month. I had a couple of really good interviews and thought I had a good chance of securing a job, but each time, I was turned down. I was unemployed and almost unemployed, and I thought that with my track record, I would have little problem getting another job in sales, but opportunities were few, and even getting an interview was difficult. The word had spread about my drinking, and my self-confidence suffered, so I started having a few drinks every night to unwind. Emma was offered a role in a new late-night drama series, or adult soap opera, that was to be broadcast after 10 p.m., allowing the writers to embrace far more mature themes. Emma gave up trying to stop me from drinking because I wouldn't have paid any attention anyway. Our marriage was heading only one way, and I was too drunk to realize it. The children were in their mid-teens when Emma was offered the role. Emma accepted the part without any discussion. She simply announced that she had taken the role, which meant that she would once again be unable to return home. The first series was to consist of 10-hour-long episodes, and filming was to take place in the production company's Bristol studios, with external scenes mostly shot in the nearby countryside. By this point, I was only sober in the morning, and by lunchtime, I needed a pick-me-up to get me through the day. By the evening, I was well-oiled, if not plastered. Emma was getting desperate about my drinking and worried about leaving the children in my care, or so she said, in an effort to get me to stop. She contacted Uncle John, who came over and tried to make me see what I was doing to myself and my Em. When Emma temporarily relocated to Bristol, I realized that things were getting desperate and made an effort to reconnect with my children. I thought I was doing well. I had reduced my drinking and tried to re-establish relations with Emma, but she was unwilling to discuss our problems on the phone. One day, after she had been gone for about 3 weeks, I went up to the studio in Bristol to try to patch things up. At first, I had problems even getting in the door. Security was tight, and I had to get one of the assistant floor managers to vouch for me before I was allowed on set. I was warned not to interrupt once the red light was on, as they were about to start shooting a scene. The assistant informed me that it was a raunchy scene, so I stood at the back and observed. Emma had told me that the new show was going to be targeted at adults, but I didn't realize that she would be nearly naked in some of the scenes. I watched as she and a man, I later found out his name was Alex, performed a deep, passionate kiss and slowly sank onto the sofa on the set. The man was wearing only a pair of boxers, and Emma had a silk robe loosely tied at the waist. She shrugged her shoulders and the robe dropped to the floor. It was clear that the editor would be busy tidying this scene up. There was no way it could be broadcast on a public network. If she was just acting aroused, she was a better act. The scene came to an abrupt end when Alex couldn't hold back anymore and climaxed unexpectedly. The director, David, called it a wrap, and everyone burst out laughing, much to Alex's embarrassment. They tried again, and this time, they got it right. David called cut before the pair slowly drew apart, still gazing into each other's eyes. Even a blind man could see the lust in their expressions. As Alex pulled her to her feet, she bent down, gathered her robe, and the director called for a lunch break, and Emma walked over to David, seeking reassurance that the scene wasn't too graphic. David kissed her on the cheek, took her hand, and they strolled toward the dressing rooms together. I quickly crossed the room and, without knocking, barged into the dressing room after them. When Emma saw me, she tried to push him away, but he was still holding her. She hissed at him to get off, and he resisted. David looked pale and appeared to be looking for a way out, but there was none except to go through me. I thumped him once on the cheek and again on the jaw, and that was all it took. He went down and stayed down. Emma had taken the opportunity to pull her robe back on and just sat there, waiting for me to say something, and when I refused to react as she expected, she simply said, "I want a divorce. I will not stay married to an alcoholic. Just so you know, he isn't the only one who has benefited from your recent failure to produce, but he is the best so far." So there it was. I'd lost my job, then my wife. In the weeks that followed, I was served with divorce papers. I was drunk most of the time and stupidly signed anything put in front of me. I later discovered that because I failed to hire a lawyer, I had signed away the house and all of our assets. I even lost visitation rights with my children, as her lawyer successfully argued that I was an alcoholic and unfit to be in charge of their welfare. I tried to call Sophia and Lucas, but Emma had changed the numbers. I was depressed, so I drank more, and the more I drank, the more depressed I became. A few weeks later, I was on the street, sharing a bottle of cheap whiskey with some other down-and-outs, when a group of young men began harassing us. We were unable to defend ourselves because we were drunk. My lasting memory is of lying in a gutter, bleeding from several cuts, while one of the youths urinated on me. Despite my inebriation, I recognized my own son, Lucas, standing to one side, watching as his father was degraded in the street. Eventually, the police and an ambulance arrived, and I was taken to a hospital, where I was kept for a few days to allow my injuries to heal. The first morning after I was entered, Uncle John came to visit me, tore a piece off of me, and began to leave. "Please, Uncle, I need assistance," I screamed out. "I know I've ignored your warnings in the past, but I've now recognized that I have significant drinking issues. She asked you to aid me." He paused and looked at me reflectively, as if trying to decide if I was worth the effort. Thank God he decided I was. He told me what I needed to do, warned me that it would be a difficult road, but promised me support when I needed it. His final words to me that morning were that, in the end, it was all up to me. I needed to want to get my life back on track more than I wanted to find the solution in a bottle. I won't bore you with all the details, but he was right, it was hard, far harder than I expected. But with the continuing support of friends in AA, I managed to stay away from alcohol for 13 months now. As I said at the beginning, I am in remission, not recovering. I am still tempted every time I see people laughing and drinking, but I have resisted so far. I know the consequences if I succumb again. When I was released from the clinic, Uncle John allowed me to return to my old flat in the basement of his property. His home was a ground-floor flat in a Victorian villa, which had once been a proper family home on 3 floors and had been converted into separate flats years ago. When I was a teenager, he and my aunt bought the basement flat with the intention that I would have an independent place when I left school. I had lived there until I married Emma, and know by this time Emma had remarried, and her new husband was David, the director she had been connected with when we broke up. He was now residing in my former house, which I had paid the mortgage on for the most of our married life. But what the hell, it was time to move on. Emma's lawyer reminded me that the restraining order preventing me from seeing my children was still in effect, which infuriated me. I had sent cards with money for each of their birthdays, but they never wrote back. When I consulted a lawyer, he confirmed that signing the divorce, Uncle John also offered me a job at his taxi and courier company, where I began by answering phones and assisting with logistics. A few months later, when he needed a driver for a wedding, he asked me to fill in, and I gladly accepted. Fortunately, my driver's license was still intact, God knows how, given the number of times I had driven under the influence, and he began using me to cover peak hours or when a driver called. I had been dry for about 14 months when Uncle John, sadly, passed away in his sleep. His funeral was attended by so many people that the crematorium could barely hold them all. I was his only living relative, and he left everything to me. Suddenly, I was in full charge of a business and responsible for the livelihoods of around 22 staff members. I kept the business running more or less as before, though I had some ideas about making it more efficient. Still, Uncle John had hired Rachel Adams, a single mother with a young child, to handle payroll and accounts a few months before his death. Nathan, Sarah's 9-year-old son, frequently came to the office after school to get a ride home, and they lived in a small rented house about 6 miles away from the office. After Uncle John's death, I grew to rely on Sarah more and more. She was an attractive woman, but I knew little about her beyond the fact that she was divorced. Over the first few weeks, I grew to value her good humor and ability to handle the drivers who constantly flirted with her. One morning, I noticed Sarah seemed down, not her usual cheery self, and she snapped at a couple of drivers who were teasing her, which was unusual for her, as she usually gave as good as she got. I waited for things to calm down before entering her office and closing the door behind me. When I asked what was wrong, she burst into tears. Her landlord was evicting her for allegedly allowing the house to be used for illicit purposes and for being behind on the rent. She swore it was false and claimed the real reason was that she had rejected his advances. I thought about it for a moment and came up with a possible solution. I told her about the basement flat, which was fully furnished, and she would only need her personal belongings, and it was currently vacant. I also explained that the internal staircase leading from the basement to the ground floor had been reinstated when I lived there previously, but she could lock the door for privacy. When she asked about the rent, I named an amount I knew she could afford, which was less. She accepted the offer without ever viewing the house, and I arranged for a van and driver to assist her move her belongings that weekend. I planned to be the driver, mostly because I wanted to speak with her landlord. We moved Sarah and Nathan into the flat in a few hours, and they seemed delighted with their new home. When I handed Sarah the key to the door leading to my flat above, she handed it right back, saying, "The door's always open for you." Then she burst into tears again, and both Nathan and I tried to console her, but she shook us off and went to the kitchen to put the kettle on. She insisted that I come down for dinner with them as a thank you, and I accepted, touched by the gesture. When Nathan went to bed, I casually said that she didn't have to refrain from drinking just because I was around. She took a big breath and added, "I thought Mike would have informed you. I'm one of his waifs and strays, and I'm also an alcoholic. If it hadn't been for him, I would have lost Nathan for good." She went on, "Mike was the one who made me recognize my life was a disaster. I was intoxicated, homeless, and unemployed, and Nathan had been placed in care. I was willing to do whatever it needed to earn money for a drink. There were plenty of guys prepared to share their beds for the night in exchange for a roof over my head and a bottle of water to keep me going. Nathan is well aware of my background, and you are now as well. It's not something I'm proud of, but I felt you should be aware." I hastened to comfort her, "Sarah, you did all you could to survive. I was there too. I have done things I'm not proud of. What's important is that we've survived the worst of it and now have a fresh opportunity. We have moved on from the past. Let us concentrate on the future. With that, I kissed her forehead and bid her goodbye. I avoided Sarah on Sunday, but when I picked her up for work on Monday, she seemed concerned. If we arrive at the office together, the guys will gossip, she remarked. He'll handle it, I assured her. Sure enough, just as we got out of the car, one of the drivers made a cheeky comment. I gathered everyone and told them in no uncertain terms that any future comments about Sarah would be considered a disciplinary issue. I explained that she and her son lived in the basement flat, and it made sense to carpool rather than have her rely on public transportation. The explanation seemed to clear the air, and things returned to normal. It was a bit of an occupational hazard, but I noticed that a couple of drivers had been subjected to both verbal and physical abuse during late-night shifts, and action had to be taken. The police were supportive and increased their patrols in the city center on weekends, but the real problem occurred when drivers were lured to fake addresses and the passengers would rob or attack them. To show my commitment, I took a cab out the next Friday and worked the entire shift with them. I installed small CCTV cameras inside the vehicles to protect my employees, and the cameras began recording as soon as the rear doors were opened. Stickers informed passengers that they were being recorded. As the pubs were closing around midnight, I was hailed by some youths standing with a girl who looked worse for wear. Her long hair covered her face, making it difficult to identify her. 5 of them got in, with the girl seated in the middle. The guy in front gave me an address, and I started driving. About halfway there, I heard the girl protest, and I noticed one of the lads had his hand on her thigh. I immediately pulled over and ordered them to stop. They didn't listen, so I drove to the nearest police station, which was only 2 minutes away. I jumped out and dragged them from the cab. As they argued, one of them noticed where we were and decided to leave quickly. The girl remained in the cab, quietly sobbing, and I froze when I recognized my daughter, Sophia. I drove her home, carried her up to the front door, and banged on it until someone answered. Brian, Emma's husband, opened the door, half-dressed, and I pushed past him. Emma appeared, wrapped in a robe, looking a little disheveled. I dropped Sophia onto the couch and began to remove her boots. Emma was high as a kite, as evidenced by her glazed eyes and the faint traces of white powder on her nostrils. Emma pushed me out of the room after I finished caring for Sophia, claiming she'd handle it. As I walked out, I couldn't help but reflect on how things had gotten this far. When I came home, Sarah was still up, and she offered me a cup of coffee as I went in. She had heard about the event from one of the other drivers. We spoke for a long time, and as we sat there on the couch, we drew closer. I kissed her lightly, and we were soon on our way upstairs to my bedroom. As Sarah and I laid in bed, we heard Nathan's little footsteps, and he stood at the door, puzzled. "What are you doing here, Mom? Why aren't you in your own bed?" he inquired, looking between us. Sarah hastily covered herself in the sheet and smiled. "In just keeping Jack company, Nathan," she whispered softly. "Go back to bed, sweetie. I will be down shortly." Sarah laughed as Nathan went, but there was a tinge of fear in her eyes. "I suppose we'll have to figure out how to explain this," she remarked. Over the next few days, I spent more time at Sarah's flat, and we began to feel like a family. Eventually, I officially moved in with her and Nathan, and things seemed to settle into a new normal. At work, I implemented more changes to the business, including expanding the courier service, and we saw consistent growth. But the situation with Sophia and Lucas weighed heavily on me. I had spoken with Emma about what had happened the night I brought Sophia home, and although she promised to speak with her, I had a feeling that nothing was going to change. The kids needed more than just an occasional visit from their mother, they needed a stable, present parent. Emma's life took another hit a few months later when the media caught wind of her and Brian's scandalous lifestyle. A national tabloid published photos from one of their parties, along with a lurid story about the couple's involvement in the underground adult film scene. The article claimed that they had been targeted in a sting operation, with undercover reporters posing as guests at one of their gatherings. The story caused a public outcry, and both Emma and Brian found themselves out of work. The production company dropped their show, and any offers for new roles dried up. Emma's employers cut ties with her, and soon she and Brian were struggling financially. I learned about the situation from mutual friends, and I wasn't surprised when Emma called me in tears, begging for help. "Please, Liam," she begged, her voice shaking. "I don't know what to do. The kids won't even talk to me. I'm being harassed by reporters, and Brian has abandoned me. He stole everything. I've got nothing left." Emma was frantic. She wanted me to take Sophia and Lucas in for a while, at least until the scandal blew over. It wasn't a difficult decision. I agreed to let the kids stay with me, and Sarah welcomed them with open arms. We set up a room for Sophia in the basement flat while Lucas shared a room with Nathan. It was a little cramped, but it worked. At first, Sophia and Lucas struggled to adjust because they were hurt by their mother's actions and Brian's presence in their lives. Sarah, on the other hand, was a calming influence. She was patient and understanding, especially with Sophia, who was carrying the most emotional baggage. The children continued to visit Emma on occasion, but their relationship remained strained, and each time they returned, they seemed more distant from her. One day, Sophia returned from a visit looking devastated, and I knew immediately that something was wrong, so I asked Sarah to speak with her while I stayed with the boys. After about an hour, Sarah emerged and told me what had occurred. During her visit, Sophia had walked in on Brian and Emma in a compromising position, and Brian had made a filthy remark about Sophia joining in, which was the last straw. Sophia couldn't bring herself to see her mother after that. I was furious and I stormed out of the house, determined to confront Brian. When I arrived at what used to be my family home, Brian answered the door. I pushed past him, demanding answers, but he just smirked, denying everything and taunting me. Emma appeared, and when I told her what Brian had said, she dismissed it, claiming Sophia must have misunderstood. I couldn't believe it. I knew Emma was too far gone to recognize how her decisions had damaged our children, so I left, horrified and determined to keep them safe. After that incident, Sophia and Lucas made it clear that they wanted nothing more to do with their mother. They settled into life with me and Sarah, and things gradually began to improve. The children were doing well in school, and they even began to refer to Sarah as Mom. It wasn't something we asked of them, but it happened naturally over time, and Sarah embraced it. We were proud of what we had accomplished, and selling the business provided us with the financial security we needed to begin a new chapter. After careful consideration, I accepted a national company's offer to buy our business with the condition that Sarah stay on for a year to assist with the transition. I proposed to Sarah during a quiet dinner by the sea, which I had been planning for weeks, and she said yes. We decided to have a small wedding with only the kids in attendance, and the ceremony was intimate and perfect. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Jane and Lucas continued to prosper. Jane had a talent for business, and after graduation, she joined the firm where I used to work, swiftly rising through the ranks. Lucas, on the other hand, got admitted into a university engineering program and played rugby. Nathan, too, was growing up rapidly. He wanted to be a pilot, and with Sarah and me at his side, he joined the university's air squadron as soon as he was old enough. His passion and tenacity made us proud. Emma's life had taken a steep decline. Brian had drained her accounts and fled, leaving her with nothing. She eventually lost the house after being unable to keep up with the mortgage payments. The last I heard, she was working as a hostess at a nightclub in Birmingham. Despite everything that had happened, I felt a twinge of sadness for her. I wouldn't wish that fate on anyone, even someone who had caused me so much pain. Sarah and I found a quiet rhythm in our lives, enjoying the time we spent with our children and each other. We frequently discussed selling the house and moving abroad once Nathan finished school, but for the time being, we were content to stay put and let the kids grow up. When I reflected about everything, I realized that although my road had been fraught with difficulties and missteps, it had eventually taken me to where I wanted to be. Sarah, Nathan, Jane, and Lucas had become my genuine family, and I had finally found the happiness and stability I had long sought. For the first time, I felt truly free from the shadows of my past and the chains of addiction, and I was finally living the life I had fought so hard to reclaim, surrounded by the people who mattered most. It wasn't the life I had hoped for, but it was better than anything I could have imagined. I never forgot the challenges that had taken me here, but I learned to accept them as a part of who I had become. I was no longer simply the guy I used to be. I was a better version, forged by the fire of my errors and stronger for the experience. Thank you for watching. What are your thoughts on Liam's decisions and his route to redemption? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more tales.